Alright, so now let's move on to talk about a second scenario that involves a third variable. And also, please let me have some water. Okay, again, we'll start with the definition of moderator. A moderator, or a moderating variable, is a variable that may or may not correlate with the outcome variable, right? It doesn't matter. It can correlate with the outcome variable, but it doesn't have to. But what is important about moderator is that once we include, or once we consider the effect of moderator, the strength or direction of the existing correlation will change. Let me repeat. A moderator does not have to be related to an outcome variable. It doesn't have to. It can. But what is important about a moderating relationship is once we include or consider the effect of moderator, the strength and direction or direction of the existing correlation would vary. Once that happens, we observe a moderating effect. Okay. So let's use the formidability hypothesis as an example. The hypothesis says stronger individuals are more easily angered. So we say that this hypothesis makes sense, well, to a certain extent. But let me ask you, could there be any sex differences? That is, does this hypothesis hold for men as well as for women? That is, could we possibly observe different kinds of correlation between physical strength and proneness to anger for men and for women? Is this correlation between physical strength and proneness to anger the same or different for the two sexes? Now, of course, we can say they're the same. The correlation does not change at all, regardless whether we consider men or consider women. That's fine. But what is potentially more interesting is this correlation might differ depending on which sex we talk about or which sex we investigate. So there are a number of possibilities. Possibility one is that for men, physical strength very strongly predict, positively so, proneness to anger. So we use three pluses to present it's a very, very strong correlation. Three pluses, right? It is possible that the correlation is still positive for women, but it's relatively weaker, only having one pluses. So that's the difference in terms of strength, right? The strength between the original correlation between strength and anger proneness is very strong for men, but less strong for women. So that's possibility one. Okay? So we can also visualize this correlation here, or this type of three variable correlation here. So we can, of course, start with a coordinate. We have strength, because that's our predictive variable, and we have anger, right? So originally we'll have just one line, if we don't consider any sex differences, right? But now we can't just have one line because we need two correlations, one line for each, because now we are considering two sexes. So we're going to erase this one line and see how we can represent the two correlations on one coordinate, which is very easy. So let's start with man. Well, simply because I talked about man first. So we say that it's a very strong correlation, and usually when we say a correlation is very strong, we will represent this very strong correlation with a steeper line, right? It's the same idea when you say the hill is very steep. This is a steeper line. So that represents a very strong correlation, and we can say, well, this line represents man. Okay, now we have women. Women, there's also a correlation between physical strength and anger proneness for women, but this correlation is less strong, but still positive. So we can have a second line here. We use a dashed line, a less steep line to represent women. So now we have the same coordinate, but two lines representing two correlations, one corresponding to men, or one and the other corresponding to women. And we definitely see that these are two different lines, representing that the correlations between strength and anger differ between men and women. Okay, so that's how we plot a moderation effect. Now, this is only our first possibility. We can have a second possibility and a third possibility. So a second possibility is that whereas the correlation between strength and anger proneness is positive for men, it becomes a negative correlation for women. It's possible. I don't know why, but we're just considering all possibilities here, right? You can also say, well, it could be a negative correlation for men, positive correlation for women. That doesn't matter, right? It will be the same idea. So again, we can consider how we plot this moderation effect, right? So we have strength, and we have anger. Okay, so again, we'll have our first line. Let's get this guy out of the way. We have positive correlation between strength and anger proneness for men. So we have a positive, we just say, well, this is a positive correlation. And we say this for man. Okay? And then we have a negative correlation between strength and anger proneness for women. So what do? How do we draw a negative correlation? You're right? It will be a line pointing downward. And we use a dashed line to just, to make it more distinctive from the line for men. Doesn't matter. You can use dashed line for men, solid line for women. Doesn't matter at all. As long as, readers can readily distinguish between these two lines, that will suffice the purpose. So now, very easily, we have a plot for this moderation effect, right? Positive for men, negative for women. All right, possibility 3 is that the correlation between strength and anger proneness is positive for men, but zero. There's no correlation at all between strength and anger proneness for women. Now, how do you plot this correlation? Now, how do you plot this moderation effect? Okay, I'll leave that to you as sort of a exercise. It's not a homework. It will not be graded, but it will be worthwhile to consider this because you bet that there will be similar questions on the exam. Okay. So in all three possibilities, a person's biological sex is the third variable, but in this case, it's not a confound, but a moderator, because in the first scenario, right? In this scenario, change the strength from very strong to slightly strong. Therefore, the strength of the original correlation between strength and anger proneness. In these two cases, well, in this case in particular, it changes the direction, right? One is positive, the other is negative correlation. So it changes the direction of the original correlation between anger and strength. In this case, it's both direction and strength, right? A positive versus a zero correlation. This is stronger than this one, and in terms of direction, they're also different, right? So that's why people's sex is a moderator here. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. Okay, so exercise for you guys. I'll give you sentences below, and your job is to identify from the sentence the predictive variable, the outcome variable, and the moderating variable. Income predicts happiness in China, but not in the US. Well, I make this up, right? There's no reason at all why this should be the case. I'm just using sort of an example here, which doesn't have to be true. It can be very well false. Okay, so in this sentence, what is the predictor, what is the outcome variable, and what is the moderating variable? I'll give you 2 seconds to consider. Okay, time's up. If you're ready, I'll announce the answer. So in this case, income is the predictor, or levels of income, right? It predicts happiness, pretty straightforward. Happiness is the outcome. Then where is the moderator? Is the moderator China? Or is US the moderator? If you answer China or answer US, you're wrong. The moderator does have something to do with China and US, but neither China nor US itself is the moderator. The moderator is country. It's not a game of word. If you think about it, China and US are the values that the country takes. Country is a variable. China is not a variable. It does not change. It will be at the same place, you know, Eastern Asia. U.S. is also not a variable. It'll always be there in the foreseeable future, right? It doesn't change. It's a constant. So China, U.S., they're not variables, but they're values that country can take. A country can be China, can be U.S., can be the U.K., can be the France. It doesn't matter, right? So the moderator here is country. Country takes the value of China or US here. So how do we plot this moderation effect here? We start with coordinate. So what shall we put here? Income. All right, predictor. Usually at the x-axis. What do we put here? Happiness. Outcome usually is placed at the y-axis. Happiness. Okay. All right. So I didn't specify the direction of the correlation. So let's say income positively predicts happiness in China, but not in the US. All right. So let's say income and happiness is positively correlated with, they're positively correlated with each other in China, but there's no such correlation in the US. There we go. Okay. Easy, huh? those are just answers. Well, culture, that's another way to say it, right? Okay, another exercise. Drinking impairs men's IQ but improves women's IQ. Again, I make this up, right? Don't think this is true. Excessive drinking impairs IQ either way, right? Regardless whether you're a man or woman, I just make this sentence up for the purpose of an exercise. So that's a note. Okay, so what is the predictive variable here, and what is the outcome variable here, and what is the moderator? Again, I'll give you 2 seconds to consider before I announce the answer. Okay, time is up, and the answer is as follows. Predictive variable is drinking, because drinking is what is having an effect on IQ, so outcome is IQ. Alright, so what is the moderator? Is the moderator men, or is the moderator women? Again, if you answer men or women, you're wrong. The correct answer is biological sex or gender, doesn't matter. So again, man is not a variable here because men are men, women are women, they're not changing at all, right? What is changing in the sentence is their biological sex. In one case, referring men, in the other case, referring women. So men and women are two values that this variable biological sex can take. Just as in the previous example, right? China and the US are the two values that country the variable can take. All right, so if that's the case, how do we plot the moderation effect here? It should be very easy, right? So we have a coordinate, so we have drinking. Oops, drinking. Okay, and then we have IQ, right? So drinking impairs men's IQ. That means, if we have too much drink, men's IQ will drop. So increase, decrease, we have a downward shooting line. This is for men. Oops, for men. Okay, there's an M here. For women, drinking improves women's IQ. That is, as drinking increases, IQ will also increase for women. So it's an upward shooting line. Women. Okay, there we go. That's our moderation effect. Okay? All right. One last important point I would like to make regarding correlation, and we'll close this lecture on that point. Oh, okay, one more exercise before I close the lecture. It is also possible that give you a graph like this, and it asks you, based on the graph, identify what is the predictor, what is the outcome, and what is the moderating variable. Okay? So here, I'll give you a few seconds to consider. Okay? Or you can pause. But anyway, whenever you're ready, right, you can pause to think. So instead of wasting more time or seconds and let the file become very large, I will just say the answer. Answer is GPA is predictor, because usually we place the predictive variable at the x-axis and the outcome variable, which is support of gun control here, at the y-axis. The moderating variable here, well, first of all, we are observing a moderation because the correlation between GPA and support of gun control is not the same for COMG students and psychology student. For COMG student, as their GPA increases, they become more supportive of controlling gun. Whereas for psychology student, as their GPA increases, right, as their GPA increases, they actually become less supportive of gun control. So the correlation between GPA and support of gun control is not the same for these two groups of students. So that means there's moderation going on here, and the moderator is major. Okay? Major is the moderator. You can take two values in this case. One value is COMG, the other value is psychology. Okay? So that's what the answer to this exercise. Lastly, a very important point I would like to make before it's too late. So if we return to the formidability hypothesis once again, it turns out there's good evidence that there is a positive correlation between physical strength and proneness to anger, such that stronger individuals are indeed more easily angered. So a positive correlation between strength and anger. Another way to say it is that the values of two variables change in the same direction. Anger and strength, they positively co-vary, right? Co means at the same time, together. Vary means change, right? Change together, right? And they do so positively. But the question is, does this covariation, does this positive correlation mean that strength will cause anger? So this is what I mean by the title of this slide, that is correlation and causation. Are they the same? Can we claim that strength causes anger because we observe a positive correlation between these two variables? Well, the answer is no, right? Because bear in mind, correlation does not imply causation. Causation is a very special word in science. It's so special that there needs to be lots of evidence from very well controlled studies before we can make any claims about causality. It is in fact so difficult to establish causality that researchers are usually very, very cautious in drawing conclusions. So in this sense, causation is a very sacred word in science, right? So logically, there are several criteria that needs to be made or met before we can claim that A caused B. So the first criterion is that, if we assume that A is the presumed cause, B is the presumed effect, right? We want A to be the cause, and we want B to be the effect. Well, in order to claim that A caused B, we first of all must establish that A correlates with B. So correlation is different from causation. That does not mean that these two are totally unrelated. Instead, correlation and causation are closely related in such a way that the first criterion to establish causality is to establish that there is a correlation, positive, negative, doesn't matter, between the presumed cause and the presumed effect. Without correlation, in other words, there's no need to discuss any further, right? This is a necessary condition. Correlation is a necessary condition for causality to happen. The second criterion is that beyond the correlation between A and B, A, the cause, must happen before B. That makes sense because cause effect cause must temporarily occur before the occurrence of effect. It can be the other way around, right? It can be, otherwise B will be the cause and A will be the effect, right? So you must establish A happens in time before B. The third criterion is there's no alternative explanation of the correlation between A and B. That is, in the terminology that we just learned, we must rule out all possible confounding variables. The correlation between A and B must be real. It can be spurious. Okay? In other words, to sort of summarize all three criteria, right? If A is present, then the result, it will be the presence of B. But at the same time, if A is absent, that will cause the absence of B. So when these two criteria are met, which are equivalent to these three criteria, then we can claim that A causes B. So you see, right, there's much more to do in addition to establishing the correlation between A and B in order to establish the causality between A and B. So that's why we must be very, very cautious and careful before make any causal claims between any two variables. Just remember, causality is a sacred term in science that must be the burden of proof will be on the researchers to claim causal relationships. Okay, so on this note, we sort of finished with our lectures on concept, construct, and variables. So now we have a very basic understanding of the building blocks of science, that is concept, construct, and variables. And next week, we'll start to talk about how we can measure variables. Okay, so I will upload the slides very soon, and I will see you next week. Have a good one.